The blood pooling beneath her dark skin looked black in the alley's shadows. And Diamante Rizzo didn't tolerate bloodshed on his territory. Especially not hers. Not his business, and certainly not the woman whose laugh had been keeping him up at night for 2 months. She tried to speak, blood bubbling at her lips, already retreating into that warrior shell he'd watched her build drink by drink, smile by smile, deflection by deflection. But he'd made his decision the moment he saw crimson streaking down her temple. Whatever jerks had touched her was now his responsibility to get rid of. Hello, family. Welcome to Love and Shattered Bond Stories. Before we continue this story and see what happens next, please hit the subscribe button and leave a like for me. It means the world to me, so you don't miss future videos from me. Thank you as you do so. Now let's dive into the story. The Blue Note Club was closing for the night. The last dregs of jazz enthusiasts and neighborhood regulars filtering out past the bar where she commanded her station like a general directing troops. Midnight saxophones still poured from the stage, competing with the rhythm of Diamante's pulse as he watched her move behind the bar with practiced grace. 2 months. That's how long she'd worked here. That's how long he'd been studying her. The exact angle of her smile when she thought no one was watching, the way her hands moved like music when she mixed drinks, the precision in every pour. The way she carried herself with quiet dignity that made grown men straighten their postures and mind their language. He shouldn't be watching her this closely. She was his staff. He had rules about that. Lines that kept his world orderly and his conscience manageable. Lines that separated the businessman from the monster, the employer from the predator. But Deborah Omara had a way of making him reconsider his rules. She'd been radiant when she started, quick-witted enough to trade barbs with Paolo, bold enough to laugh when Diamante's consigliera made terrible jokes about imported whiskey. There had been fire in her eyes then, the kind that made him wonder what she'd look like in his penthouse instead of behind his bar, wearing something besides that crisp black vest and bow tie. That fire had been dampened recently, banked low by something that made her glance toward the back door too often, and her laughter come half a beat too late despite her flawless performance. Diamante tracked her movements now from his corner booth, noting details his crew missed while they debated tomorrow's shipment routes. The way she gripped bottles with white-knuckled intensity, how her breathing shifted when loud voices erupted from the pool tables. The deliberate positioning of her body, always aware of exits, always calculating distances. She was afraid, and that made him furious. "Boss, you listening?" Paolo's voice cut through his observation. "Yeah," he replied. The trash needed taking out. An excuse, but he'd take it. He needed air anyway. Needed to clear his head of this obsession with an employee he had no business wanting. He grabbed the bags from behind the bar and headed for the back door. The alley hit him with November cold and the stink of the dumpster. He tossed the bags, turned back toward the door, and physics betrayed his careful distance. She was there. Deborah Omara, his untouchable bartender, crumpled against rain-slicked brick like a discarded doll. Blood. Too much blood. Painted the cobblestones black beneath the Blue Note's neon pulse. Her uniform was torn, her vest hanging open, dark skin marred by brutal evidence of fists and fury. Diamante went absolutely still. Then he moved, for strides closed the distance. His $1,500 suit hit filthy pavement as he knelt, hands that had broken bones and ended lives, hovering over her battered face with uncharacteristic hesitation. Deborah. Her eyes struggled to focus. When they did, something worse than her injuries gutted him. That flash of fear before recognition replaced it. She'd been afraid of him for one terrible second, and that knowledge burned worse than any bullet wound he'd taken. "Mr. Rizzo." Blood trickled from her split lip, her voice stripped of all the music he'd spent 2 months memorizing. He wanted that music back. Needed to know what. Who stole it? Who did this? The words came out quieter than intended, deadly calm masking the violence building in his chest. "Doesn't matter." She tried to move, winced, her body betraying the lie. "Not your problem." His jaw tightened. "The hell it isn't." His fingers found her chin, tilting her face toward the alley light with a gentleness that would have shocked his crew. Up close, the damage was worse, systematic, calculated. This wasn't random violence. This was a message. Who did this? He asked again. She laughed, bitter, broken, nothing like the sound that had been haunting him. Castellano's men. Said my grandmother needs to sell her building. Her eyes hardened despite the pain, and there was his fire, banked but not extinguished. I told them to go to hell. Castellano. The name detonated in his mind like a grenade. He knew that corporation, those vultures circling the neighborhood with their predatory contracts and political connections. He'd stayed neutral, kept his business separate from community politics, maintained the careful balance that let the blue note thrive in this gentrifying neighborhood. That balance had just shattered. How many? He asked. 2. Big guys. Military. She tried to stand, legs betraying her. Look, I just need to get home. You're not going anywhere. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with arms that had never held something so precious and so broken. Except inside where my doctor can check you properly. He added, I know you don't need rescuing. He shouldered through the back door into the warm amber glow of his private office. You've made that abundantly clear every night for 2 months with the way you handle drunk idiots and entitled punks who think your smile is for sale. He set her carefully on his leather sofa, already pulling out his phone to summon his personal physician, the discreet kind who knew how to treat bullet wounds and keep his mouth shut. But they made this my business the moment they spilled blood in my alley, behind my club, on my territory. He turned back to face her, and whatever she saw in his expression made her breath catch. And when someone touches what's mine, I don't negotiate. I don't forgive. I'm not yours, Deborah said as he cut her off. No. He grabbed the first aid kit, knelt in front of her, began cleaning blood from her face with steady hands. But you work for me. You're under my protection whether you asked for it or not. And those bastards just declared war on someone who actually knows how to fight one. Deborah stared at him, something shifting behind the pain in her eyes. You don't understand what you're getting into. These aren't street thugs. Castellano has lawyers, politicians, money. So do I. He pressed gauze against the gash above her eyebrow, watched her wince. Plus something they don't. What's that? He met her gaze, letting her see past the expensive suits and charming smiles to the monster he kept carefully leashed. Absolutely nothing to lose. And a very long memory for people who hurt what's mine. He said. Silence stretched between them, filled only with her ragged breathing and the distant pulse of jazz from the main room. Outside, rain began to fall, washing blood down the alley drains. Inside, something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that neither of them could uncross. Deborah Omara had been attacked on his territory, and Diamante Rizzo was about to remind this city exactly what happened when someone made that mistake. The war had begun. Castellano just didn't know he'd already lost. Hold still, Diamante said as he dabbed antiseptic on the cut above her eyebrow, watched her jaw clench against the sting. That laugh felt like a lifetime ago now, buried under whatever terror these bastards had inflicted. They came to the bar 3 weeks ago, Deborah said quietly, staring at his office wall instead of his face. Polite at first. Suits and smiles. Said Castellano Corporation was interested in purchasing my grandmother's building. Offered what they called a generous price. Let me guess. Diamante's hand steadied her chin with unexpected gentleness. Wasn't generous. 30 cents on the dollar for a property worth $2 million. Bitterness crept into her voice like poison. My grandmother built that brownstone with my grandfather in 1978. Survived redlining, survived flights, survived every economic crash this city threw at them. She laughed in their faces. So they came back. 5 times. Each visit less polite. Started showing up at her building unannounced, inspecting the property. Finding code violations that didn't exist. Photographing residents. Then they found out where I worked. Her voice dropped to something hollow. Said if I convinced her to sell, everyone stays safe. If not, she gestured to her battered face with a trembling hand. Diamante set down the gauze, his tattooed hands curling into fists that had ended men for less. They did this because you told them no. He asked. I told them to back out. Fire sparked in her eyes despite the pain, and there was the woman he'd been watching for 2 months. My grandmother didn't survive everything she survived just to lose her legacy to corporate vultures in expensive suits. Something shifted in his chest. Respect, recognition, rage all tangled together into something dangerous. He stood, moved to the window overlooking the neighborhood. Neon reflected off rain-soaked streets. The same streets his family had been forced from decades ago, while the city looked the other way. My family owned a building in Little Italy, he said to the glass. 1985. Developers wanted the land for condos. Made the same promises. Fair price, new opportunities. Rising tide lifts all boats. My grandfather refused. He turned back to her. They made life impossible. Fires, violations, inspections. His brother beaten on his way home from church. 6 months later, we sold for nothing and scattered like refugees. Understanding dawned in Deborah's eyes. That's why you opened the blue note here. In this neighborhood. I told myself I was different. That I earned my success legitimately. That I wasn't displacing anyone. His laugh held no humor. But you're right. I run a club in a gentrifying neighborhood charging $20 for cocktails. I'm part of the problem. So what now? Skepticism edged her voice, sharp as broken glass. You going to make me feel better with guilt and good intentions while my grandmother loses everything? No. He crossed back to her, crouched so they were eye level, so she could see exactly what lived behind his civilized mask. I'm going to do what I do best, make bad men pay. Legally, methodically, completely. By the time I'm done, Castellano will beg federal authorities for witness protection. And if legal doesn't work, his smile was all teeth and dark promise. Then we discuss alternative solutions. The kind I'm significantly better at. Paolo arrived at dawn with 3 file boxes and murder in his eyes. Vincent Castellano, he said, dropping the first box on Diamante's desk with enough force to rattle the whiskey glasses. CEO of Castellano Corporation. Princeton graduate, City Planning Commission for 6 years, currently sits on 3 nonprofit boards dedicated to urban renewal. The way Paolo said it made the words sound like a disease. Diamante opened the first file. A photograph stared back, silver-haired man in a $5,000 suit, shaking hands with the mayor at some charity gala. He looked legitimate, respectable, exactly like the kind of predator who thrived in plain sight. 23 properties targeted in the last 24 months, Paolo continued, spreading documents across the mahogany surface like evidence at a crime scene. All in historically Black and Latino neighborhoods. All facing redevelopment. The pattern emerged like a roadmap to hell. Mrs. Ling's corner store, arson, 3 weeks after she refused to sell. Mr. Williams' barbershop, sudden health code violations that didn't exist the month prior. The Castro family's apartment building, predatory loan that somehow accelerated foreclosure proceedings despite payments being current. Diamante's jaw tightened with each photograph. Families displaced, businesses shuttered, communities erased. And in every case, the same corporate signature hidden behind shell companies with names like Urban Future LLC and Heritage Development Partners. How many complaints filed? Diamante asked, though he already knew the answer would make him sick. 47. Dismissed, buried, or mysteriously lost in bureaucratic red tape. Paolo pulled out another folder, this one thick with financial records. Castellano donates heavily to city council campaigns. 3 councilors, 2 zoning board members, 1 judge. All in his pocket. The enforcers? David Briones and Fred Rice. Ex-military, dishonorable discharges for excessive force. David did 2 years for assault in Georgia before Castellano hired him as head of security. Paolo's expression turned grim. They're professionals. They know exactly how much damage to inflict without killing. Usually. The word hung in the air like a noose. Diamante studied a photograph of a burned-out building, its charred skeleton stark against a dawn sky. Someone's home reduced to ash and memory. Someone's legacy erased for luxury condos that would price out 3 generations of families. Just like his family. He could still see his grandfather's face the day they'd loaded the last boxes into borrowed trucks. The way something had broken in the old man's eyes, watching his neighborhood disappear behind them. How he'd died 6 months later. Heart attack, the doctors said, but Diamante knew better. You could kill a man without ever touching him. Just take away everything that gave his life meaning and watch him crumble. They think they're untouchable, Diamante said quietly, closing the file on Castellano's smiling face. They think money and connections make them invincible. They're not wrong, Paolo pointed out. Systems rigged in their favor. Then we don't use the system. Diamante stood, moved to the window where morning light was breaking over his neighborhood. His territory, filled with people who trusted him to protect what mattered. We document everything. Every assault, every bribe, every shell company. We build a case so airtight the FBI can't ignore it. And if they do ignore it, Diamante's reflection in the glass looked like his grandfather's ghost. Then we stop being businessmen and become what we actually are. He turned back to Paolo, and his consigliere recognized the look. The one that had built their empire on the bones of men who'd underestimated them. We become the justice the system refuses to deliver. Paolo's smile was sharp as a blade. When do we start? We already have, Diamante announced. Councilwoman Lori Jackson walked into the blue note like she was entering a battlefield, which Diamante supposed she was. You're asking me to trust a mobster, she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from him. 50-something, sharp-eyed, wearing a power suit that had seen better days and an expression that had seen worse corruption. I'm asking you to accept help from someone who actually has the resources to fight back. Diamante slid a folder across the table. Castellano's donation records. Notice anyone familiar? Her jaw tightened as she flipped through pages. 3 of my colleagues. Sons of bitches. Can you get property owners to talk? They're terrified. Castellano's enforcers don't leave witnesses who feel comfortable testifying. She closed the folder. But I know someone who might help. Joseph Smith arrived an hour later. Civil rights attorney, housing discrimination specialist, and according to Paolo's background check, someone who'd been fighting predatory developers for 2 decades with more passion than profit. I've been documenting Castellano's pattern for 18 months, Reeves said, spreading his own files across Diamante's desk. But documentation without testimony is just paper. Then we get testimony. Diamante stood. Tonight. Here. 23 property owners showed up to the community meeting, though half looked ready to bolt. They huddled in the Blue Note's back room, speaking in whispers, flinching at every sound. Diamante understood. Fear was Castellano's most effective weapon. Thank you for coming, Councilwoman Jackson began, but nervous murmurs drowned her out. Easy for you to say. Someone called out. You're not the one getting death threats. You're right. Deborah's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She stood, and Diamante saw every eye turn to her face. Still bruised, still marked by Castellano's violence. I'm the one who got beaten unconscious in an alley for telling them no. I'm the one they promised would be just another statistic if my grandmother didn't sell. Silence fell like a hammer. I was scared too, she continued, steadier now. Scared of retaliation, scared of losing everything, scared of dying in some alley where nobody would care. But silence is exactly what they count on. My grandmother didn't survive segregation and redlining, and every systemic attempt to erase her just to lose her building to corporate thugs in expensive suits. An elderly woman in the back stood slowly. They burned my store. Told the police it was faulty wiring. It wasn't. They threatened my family, another voice added. Said my daughter would have an accident walking home from school. One by one, stories poured out. 2 years of systematic terror, finally given voice. Surveillance starts tonight, Paolo reported 3 days later, spreading equipment across Diamante's desk. Cameras on 6 properties, 3 informants inside Castellano's operation, forensic accountant tracing shell companies. The first breakthrough came within a week. Video footage of David cornering an elderly tenant, his threats explicit and damning. Paolo's team captured everything. Send it to Maria Thornhill at the Alternative Weekly, Diamante ordered. Anonymous tip. The article appeared 2 days later. Corporate violence, gentrification's hidden cost. That night, someone tried to burn down the community center. He knows we're watching, Paolo said, surveying the damage, minimal, thanks to quick responding neighbors. Good. Diamante's smile was cold. Cornered animals make mistakes, and we'll document every single one. He added, this is unnecessary. Deborah said, standing in the doorway of Diamante's penthouse like she was deciding whether to cross a threshold or flee. David knows where you live. Diamante set her overnight bag down, careful not to crowd her. He tried to burn down the community center last night. You think he won't come back for you? She didn't argue, which told him everything about how scared she actually was beneath that armor of pride. The penthouse felt different with her in it. Too big, too cold, too obviously the home of a man who'd built walls out of marble and money. She moved through the space like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, fingers trailing over his grandmother's photographs on the mantel. Your family? She asked. What's left of it? He poured 2 glasses of wine, offered her one. Nana's the only one who still talks to me. Says I remind her of my grandfather, stubborn and stupid in equal measure. She's not wrong. But Deborah smiled, the first real smile he'd seen since the alley. It disappeared quickly. This feels wrong. You in your tower, me hiding behind your money and power. I've been saving myself my whole life, Diamante. I know you don't need saving. He set down his glass, closed the distance between them. That's exactly why I'm not trying to save you. I'm fighting beside you. There's a difference. She looked up at him, something shifting in those dark eyes. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, you're still the man with all the power making all the decisions. Then tell me what you want me to do differently. She stopped, swallowed hard. I want to not be afraid every time I walk outside. I want my grandmother safe. I want this neighborhood to survive without your protection because we shouldn't need a mobster to keep us from being erased. You're right. You shouldn't. He touched her face, gentle on the fading bruises. But until the system works the way it should, I'm what you've got. The kiss happened like gravity. Inevitable, terrifying, crossing every boundary he built between employer and employee, protector and protected, his world and hers. She tasted like wine and fury, and something achingly vulnerable he hadn't expected. The crew's talking, Paolo said the next morning, voice carefully neutral. Some of them think we're too deep in neighborhood politics. That this isn't our fight. Diamante's jaw tightened. Tell them anyone under my protection is family. That's the code. Always has been. And this neighborhood. He looked out at the streets below, at the community they were fighting to preserve. It's family now. Vincent Castellano's press conference aired that afternoon on every local channel. Criminal elements are interfering with legitimate business development, he said, all polished and practiced indignation. Threatening hardworking citizens and spreading misinformation about our community improvement initiatives. Community improvement, Deborah spat at the television. Is that what he calls terrorizing elderly people? The doorbell interrupted her rage. Diamante opened it to find a woman in her 70s, steel in her spine and fire in her eyes that marked her unmistakably as Deborah's grandmother. Lorraine Omara, she said. And you're the gangster trying to save my granddaughter. Trying to fight beside her, he corrected. There's a difference. She studied him with a gaze that had survived decades of systemic oppression and wasn't impressed by expensive suits or Italian charm. Then slowly she nodded. My husband used to say you judge a man by what he protects, not what he owns. She stepped inside. Show me you're worth my granddaughter's trust, Mr. Rizzo. Because if you're not, money and power won't save you from me. The exposé hit the front page of the city's largest newspaper on a Tuesday morning. Corporate violence, the dark side of gentrification. Maria Thornhill had done her job well. 23 documented cases, video evidence, financial records tracing shell companies back to Castellano Corporation. Photos of burned buildings, beaten residents, families forced into homelessness. The kind of journalism that ended careers and launched federal investigations. By Wednesday, the FBI announced an investigation. They're actually doing it, Deborah whispered, staring at the news crawl on TV. They're actually investigating. We gave them a case they couldn't ignore. Diamante watched her face, saw hope and terror warring there. Hope was more dangerous. It made you vulnerable when you needed to stay sharp. 300 people showed up to the rally at City Hall. Diamante stayed in the background, let Councilwoman Jackson lead. This was their moment, not his. But he watched Deborah climb those steps, face the cameras, and speak truth to power with a voice that didn't shake. My name is Deborah Omara. 3 weeks ago, I was beaten unconscious for refusing to help Castellano Corporation steal my grandmother's building. She lifted her chin, defiant. I'm not the first. I won't be the last unless we stand together. 11 more property owners joined her. 12 voices, 12 stories, 12 pieces of evidence that Castellano's empire was built on terror. The civil lawsuits filed that afternoon numbered in the dozens. National news picked it up, Paolo reported, scrolling through his phone. They're running segments on predatory development. Castellano's stock dropped 18% today. Good. Let the bastard bleed money while the FBI built their case. The city council called an emergency meeting that night, voted to temporarily halt all demolition permits, pending investigation. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but it was something. The threatening phone calls started that same night. You should have stayed out of this, the voice on Deborah's phone said, mechanical and distorted. Now you're going to watch everyone you love suffer. Diamante doubled security, put men on her grandmother's building, had Paolo's team monitor every camera in a 6-block radius. Cornered animals are most dangerous, he told his crew. Castellano's losing everything. That makes him unpredictable. He didn't know how right he was until Paolo showed him the surveillance footage. David and Fred in a black SUV, parked across from the Blue Note for 3 hours, watching. Waiting. They're planning something, Paolo said. Let them plan. Diamante's voice was cold steel. We'll be ready. But the next morning, Mrs. Ling's rebuilt corner store had every window smashed. Mr. William found his barbershop spray-painted with threats. The Castro family woke to slashed tires and dead animals on their doorstep. Castellano was lashing out, desperate and dangerous. And Diamante knew with terrible certainty that Deborah would be next. I want her protected every second, he ordered. She doesn't leave the penthouse without 3 of our best. She won't like being caged, Paolo warned. She'll be alive. Diamante stared at the surveillance photo of David, memorizing every line of the enforcer's face. That's all that matters. On the monitor, David pointed directly at the camera. Smiled. The message was clear. We're coming. They're moving tonight. Paolo's voice crackled through the phone at 3 a.m., sharp with urgency. Wiretap just picked it up. David and Fred discussing the bartender problem. Diamante was already moving, pulling on clothes with one hand while keeping the phone pressed to his ear. What exactly did they say? Make it look like a robbery. She'll just be another statistic. Castellano wants this handled before the FBI digs deeper. Paolo paused. Boss, they're planning to erase her. The words landed like bullets, each one finding its mark in Diamante's chest. He looked toward his bedroom where Deborah was sleeping, finally peaceful after weeks of fear. Not for long. Get me Agent Torres, he said, and assemble the crew. Full surveillance package. You have a plan? Let them come. His voice turned to ice. But we document everything. Every threat, every move, every word. When the FBI makes arrests, I want it airtight. Agent Torres arrived at dawn, skeptical and sharp-eyed. You're asking me to use a civilian as bait. I'm offering you David and Fred on attempted murder charges, plus enough evidence to connect them directly to Castellano. Diamante slid the wiretap transcripts across the table. Unless you prefer I handle this my way. Torres's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what my way meant. We do this by the book. My people control the operation. Your people wait for my signal. She's under my protection. She's a human being, not property. I know, and that was precisely why his hands were shaking. Absolutely not. Deborah's voice cut through the penthouse like a whip when he explained the plan. You want to use me as bait? Are you insane? I want them arrested with enough evidence to guarantee conviction. Diamante kept his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his throat. You go to work like normal. They make their move. We're there to stop them, and the FBI documents everything. So I'm just supposed to walk into an ambush? You're supposed to trust me to keep you safe. Trust you to control me, you mean? Her eyes blazed. This is my fight too, Diamante. My grandmother's legacy, my community. My choice whether to risk my life for it. Your choice to die? He asked. My choice to fight back. She stepped closer, fury and fear mixing in her expression. You don't get to decide for me. Not about this. The argument raged for an hour. Autonomy versus protection, trust versus control, love versus the terrible mathematics of keeping someone alive. Finally, they found compromise. Hidden cameras. Trackers sewn into your clothes. Earpiece so you can hear us at all times. Diamante's hands were gentle despite his fear as he showed her the equipment. You signal distress, we move. You don't wait for permission. And if they come before I can signal, then I break every rule I just agreed to and get you out. He cupped her face. Deal. Deal, she replied. Midnight came. Blue Note closing. Deborah walked into the parking lot with practiced calm, keys in hand. The black SUV waited in the shadows. Inside his surveillance van, Diamante watched monitors with his heart in his throat. Everyone in position? Confirmed, Paolo responded. FBI 2 blocks out. We've got 6 angles on the lot. On screen, David and Fred emerged from their vehicle. The trap was set. Deborah's heels clicked against wet pavement, each step measured and deliberate. She could feel them behind her. 2 shadows peeling away from the black SUV, footsteps synchronized like predators closing in. Her hand tightened around her keys. The tracker in her collar felt like a lifeline. The earpiece transmitted Diamante's breathing, steady and close. I'm here, his voice whispered. Just a little further. David's hand clamped on her shoulder, spinning her into the alley. Fred blocked the exit, all muscle and cold efficiency. Castellano sends his regards, David said, almost conversational. Should have taken the money, sweetheart. Would have been easier for everyone. Deborah's keys raked across his face before he could react. David roared, blood streaming from his cheek. Fred lunged. She pivoted, grabbed a discarded bottle, smashed it against brick. The jagged glass became a weapon in her hand. Not elegant, not trained, pure survival instinct. You picked the wrong woman to break. She slashed at Fred, caught his arm, drew blood. My grandmother survived worse than you. And so will I. But David was bigger, trained, brutal. He caught her wrist, twisted until the bottle fell, slammed her against the wall hard enough to crack ribs. Nothing personal. His hands found her throat, squeezed. Just business. The world started graying at the edges. Deborah clawed at his hands, kicked, fought. But her lungs were screaming and her vision was tunneling. Anne, take your hands off her. Now. Diamante's voice cut through the darkness like salvation and damnation combined. David turned, and the fist that connected with his jaw held 2 months of contained fury. The enforcer crashed into trash cans, dazed but reaching for his weapon. Paolo materialized behind Fred, arm locked around his throat. Don't, he said. But Diamante wasn't interested in warnings. He was violence incarnate, every careful control shattered. David tried to fight back. Trained military responses, efficient and deadly. Diamante was deadlier. Each blow was calculated to hurt, to break, to make David understand exactly what happened when you touch something precious. You don't get to die easy, Diamante snarled, David's blood on his tattooed knuckles. You're going to confess everything. FBI vehicles screamed into the alley, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. Agent Torres took in the scene. Cameras everywhere, recording every angle, Deborah gasping against the wall, David broken on the ground. Hands where I can see them, Torres ordered. David laughed through split lips, then started sobbing. He ordered all of it. Castellano. Every beating, every fire, every threat. Said do whatever it takes to clear the properties. Words spilled out like blood. We were just following orders. He promised us protection. He promised. David Briones, Fred Rice, you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault, conspiracy to commit murder. Torres's voice faded as she read them their rights. Diamante ignored the FBI, the cameras, everything except Deborah. He pulled her against his chest, felt her shake with adrenaline and rage and relief. You fought back, he whispered into her hair. Damn right I did. Her voice was hoarse but fierce. You think I was going to let them win? The bruises on Deborah's throat took 2 weeks to fade. The nightmares took longer. Diamante never left her side. He worked from the penthouse, held her when she woke gasping, and said nothing when she flinched at shadows. Trauma had its own timeline, and he'd learned patience in a business that taught brutal lessons. David's talking, Paolo reported on day 3. Gave the FBI everything. Shell companies bribed officials, encrypted communications. Castellano's entire operation. By day 7, the dominoes started falling. Vincent Castellano was arrested at his country club, handcuffed in front of Princeton alumni and city elite. The charges read like a crime novel: racketeering, conspiracy to commit assault, attempted murder, wire fraud, bribery of public officials. The shell companies unraveled next. Millions in fraudulent transactions, properties acquired through intimidation and violence, paper trails that connected Castellano to 24 crimes across 18 months. 3 city councilors resigned within 48 hours. 2 zoning board members. 1 judge quietly announced early retirement. The neighborhood erupted in celebration. "I don't know how to reconcile this," Deborah said on the penthouse balcony, watching the city lights blur through champagne and confusion. "I fell for a criminal while fighting other criminals. What does that make me?" Diamante stood beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to process. "Someone who survived," he said. "You're not making this easier." "I'm not trying to." He turned to face her. "I'm not a good man by any legal definition. I've hurt people, broken laws, built an empire on violence and fear. But I'm a man who keeps his word. I promised to protect you and your community. I kept that promise. And now you decide if that's enough." Silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say. The door opened. Lorraine O'Mara walked onto the balcony, carrying herself like the queen she'd always been. "Grandmother." "Hush, child." Lorraine studied Diamante with those fierce eyes that had witnessed decades of injustice and emerged unbroken. "My granddaughter thinks she needs my permission to love you." "Does she have it?" Diamante asked quietly. "You stood up when others wouldn't. You fought when the system failed us. You kept my baby alive." Lorraine's voice softened. "That's what matters. Not what you've done, but what you chose to do when it counted." The Community Land Trust formed 2 months later. 23 properties preserved for affordable housing, protected from predatory development in perpetuity. Lorraine's brownstone became its headquarters. Deborah stood before City Council, testifying about predatory practices and community preservation. She'd found her voice, and it carried weight earned through survival. "We almost lost everything to corporate greed dressed up as progress," she said. "But we fought back. Together." Afterward, Diamante waited outside, leaning against his car like some noir film character. She walked to him, bruises finally faded, strength restored. "You're still a criminal," she said. "And you're still the bravest woman I know. This is probably a terrible idea." "Probably." He pulled her close. "But we've survived worse." She kissed him then, not tentative anymore, not crossing boundaries, just claiming what they'd both fought too hard to deny. Justice wasn't always clean. Love wasn't always simple. But they were both real, both earned, both worth the fight. 6 weeks after Castellano's arrest, the Blue Note Club was packed wall to wall with celebration and defiance in equal measure. Deborah commanded the bar like she'd never left, except now her laugh carried no shadows, her smile held no fear, and when regulars asked about the scars on her throat, she told them exactly how she'd earned them. Fighting back, surviving, winning. Diamante watched from his corner booth, nursing whiskey and wonder. "She's stronger than me," he told Paolo, who'd stopped pretending not to notice his boss's complete infatuation. "Always was. You're not exactly subtle about it anymore." Paolo said. "Why would I be?" Their relationship was public now, complicated, controversial, constantly scrutinized. Black bartender and Italian mobster, crossing lines of class and culture and criminal morality that made some people uncomfortable. Good. Comfort was overrated. His nana had flown in from Queens last week, taken one look at Deborah, and declared her perfect. "You're good for my grandson," she'd said in Italian-accented English, gripping Deborah's hands with surprising strength. "You have fire. He needs fire." His grandfather had fire too, before they broke him. Lorraine O'Mara had been more reserved, but her blessing came in quieter ways. Inviting Diamante to Sunday dinner, trusting him with her granddaughter's heart, acknowledging that sometimes protection came from unexpected places. Her building stood proud now, designated historic landmark, protected by law and community will. A plaque outside read, Omara Building, Symbol of Resistance, 1978 present. The block party stretched 3 streets, music spilling from the Blue Note and mixing with food trucks and children's laughter. The neighborhood that had nearly been erased was celebrating survival, solidarity, the radical act of still existing. Come with me, Diamante said, taking Deborah's hand. The Blue Note's rooftop offered a view of everything they'd fought for: preserved buildings, thriving businesses, community intact. Neon from the club sign painted them in blue and red, the city spreading out beneath them like a promise kept. You're still a criminal, Deborah said, leaning against the railing. And you're still the bravest woman I know. He pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her, whiskey and courage and home. People talk, you know. Say I sold out by falling for the man with money and power. What do you say? She turned in his arms, eyes fierce as the night they'd met. I say I learned power isn't about what you take. It's about what you protect. And for the first time in my life, I have someone who protects without trying to own me. The kiss tasted like victory and whiskey, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Partnership. Equals. Love that crossed every line that should have kept them apart. Below, the neighborhood thrived, saved not by the system, but by community and an unlikely alliance between a bartender who refused to break and a mobster who chose protection over profit. Lorraine's building stood illuminated, proud and permanent. The Blue Note's neon pulsed like a heartbeat. And on the rooftop, 2 people from different worlds stood together, overlooking the community they'd fought to preserve, knowing that sometimes justice wore unexpected faces and love refused to follow rules. They'd earned this view. Every bruise, every risk, every line they'd crossed. And they'd defend it together, always. So tell me, family, what's your take on this story? Was Deborah right to stand her ground and fight back, even if it meant partnering with a man whose world is built on danger and power? Or should she have trusted the system and waited for justice the proper way? What would you have done in her place? Risk everything to protect your family's legacy, or walk away to stay safe? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this story of survival, love, and the fight against the forces trying to erase whole communities. And before you go, where are you watching from, and how's the weather over there today? I love seeing this global family connect. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who loves powerful narratives about resilience and impossible choices. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.